Running a studio or an online business is no small feat, particularly when it comes to managing client conflicts. So, whether it's a mix up with a parent or a clash with a student, those bumps in the road can really test our patience and really throw us off of our game. So, today, we are going to explore some ways to keep ourselves cool as cucumbers. We're going to look at how we can turn those tricky moments into chances to make our studio communities stronger and our communication game sharper. So I'm looking forward to learning out loud with you on this topic today. But before we get to it, we'll play a little bit of music and we'll make sure we're going live in all the places and spaces. While I do that, let me know that you're tuning in and where you're coming from today. Hey there, and welcome to the Wednesday broadcast. The topic of the day, we are going to be looking at managing conflicts in the studio or in your online business. Now, this is something that we've touched on in a variety of broadcasts in the past, but we've never really honed in on the topic of conflict. So I thought, it's high time to have this discussion today. If you're new here, I'll introduce myself real quickly. My name is Sara Campbell. I'm a business strategist, mindset, and marketing coach for music studio owners and online educators just like you. And we go live here most Wednesdays where we talk about those topics. And today we're going to be talking about strategies to help you avoid conflict and deal with conflict in your studio, because we know conflict is bound to happen no matter what we do. In order to try to prevent it, it will happen. And we can definitely see that as true by looking at any of the online forums. If you look at the questions that people bring up there, conflict is one of the big ones. So let's preface this conversation with a few things. Quick housekeeping. If you hear something that is valuable to you today, be sure to share that. If you are with us live, give us your takeaway and we'll bring that up on the screen. And we also have the Savvy Sara bot set up and ready to roll for you with the brief notes from today. So a bullet pointed list of the things that we are discussing. So if you are on Facebook, or if you are on Instagram, you can drop the word conflict down below to get a hold of those notes and the resources we're going to be talking about. And if you are watching us on YouTube, please look down below in the description or in the live chat, and you'll find a link that you can click in order to get those things from today. You'll also find in these things that the bot sends you, you'll find the opportunity to join our email list where you can get our weekly newsletter that sends out resources and tips that we think will be useful for you in managing your own studio business. Okay, so all of that aside, I'll say hey there to Laura. Laura's tuning in. I see Karen is here. Leishan is here, and so is Christina. Nice to see you all. Thanks for tuning in today. Now we are going to let's unpack this issue and look at why we're discussing this today, because I think that this is something that is really important. So, conflict is inevitable, especially when you're working in the type of environment that we have in our studio, which is a collaborative environment. Conflicts will arise, whether it's something from, misunderstandings with policies or business procedures, or it could be conflict with a student who's just not getting, that you're not communicating well with them, they're not communicating well with you, etc. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through a few different things. We are going to start by identifying common sources of conflict and having a discussion around, how we can recognize those and how we can start setting procedures in place in our business so that we have an SOP, right? A standard operating procedure to deal with those kinds of things. We are going to be talking about, I have a little thing called the conflict test, which is a good way to test whether or not this is an actual conflict or if it's just a misunderstanding or a communication issue. And then we're also going to be talking about preventative measures that you can take as a business owner in order to lessen the chances of there being conflict in your studio. Because, conflict is something that can really, and we've seen this, I think you all have seen this, it can really throw us. And it can kind of screw up your week. So what I'm hoping that people will be able to take away from this conversation today is, one, that you're not alone, and two, that you are an amazing business owner who is really good at dealing with conflict when we can sit down and really outline how we want to do things. All right, so I see Linda is tuning in as well. Awesome. If you're here, say hello. All right, let's get to the points, shall we? Okay, so let's talk about, actually, just, a question for those of you who are tuning in, whether you're live or on the replay. I'd love to know, what's your number one tip when it comes to dealing with conflict in your business? Share your hot tips down below. I'd love to bring those up today. For those of you who are watching live, we'd love to bring those up. And just random, I have to celebrate this beautiful mug because it's also made by a voice teacher friend of mine. She's so freaking talented. Okay. Share your number one tips for dealing with conflict down below. We'll bring those up and let's get started. So our first point today is to talk about sources and types of conflicts. So I have a few things I'd like to say about this. So here are some typical scenarios that might lead into conflicts. And we're looking at both conflicts that may happen with the parent client and the student client, because the majority of teachers, I guess a lot of teachers have two clients, right? You don't just have the student, you also have the parent. And in some cases, you have multiple parents or multiple guardians that you are interacting with. So when it comes to conflicts with parents, some of the things that are acceptable and expected, these things that we know are going to arise, will be things like policy misunderstandings, misreadings, or didn't readings. Because we know that is, just people don't read, myself included. Like I'm guilty of this. So, these are acceptable. They're expected, when there's unclear communication, or if somebody hasn't read something or they read it years ago and then forgot it. These are the types of things that we can expect. Let's also talk about things that are unacceptable. Now, these things that I wanted to outline these at the top of the broadcast because I wanted to be clear that it is not your job to solve every type of conflict in your studio. You deserve to be respected as a business owner. So things that are unacceptable types of conflicts include things like aggressive or threatening communication, any form of communication that with a parent that involves yelling or threatening or derogatory language towards you or a staff member. No, we don't deal with that. This kind of behavior can lead to a hostile environment and is very counterproductive to resolving any issues. Other things that are not acceptable, intentionally bypassing established protocols when things are understood. So if you have clients that are trying to circumvent studio policies or procedures, this undermines the structure and the fairness of your studio's operation, and that's not acceptable. And the final one, I don't think that this is an issue for most people, but I'll just mention it. Public criticism. So publicly criticizing the studio policies or staff on social media or in front of other parents and students, that is unacceptable behavior because that can damage reputations and create divisions very easily. So those are, that will need to be, dealt with. And I think that's a discussion for another day because those circumstances are far and few between. And I know that teachers are concerned about that kind of thing because I've had many people, mention like, I'm afraid they're going to leave a negative review That's a conversation for another day. Just yesterday, I was having a conversation with a one-on-one client, and one of the things that came up in our conversation is that, you know what, most people are really lovely. It's true. Most of our clients, they're really lovely people. So if we can assume the best in most situations, we shouldn't have to really be too afraid of that type of thing. So those are the typical types of conflicts with parents. If you have any other things to add to that list, let me know. I'll bring up a couple of comments before we get to the typical kinds of conflicts with students. Okay, so Laura says her number one tip in dealing with conflict is to stick to the facts. I love that. And Kristen is saying, I'm tuning in from Royal Oaks, Michigan, and she also paints mandalas. I really love that. Yeah, it's just like, this just makes me incredibly happy whenever I get to use this mug. Okay, so back to sources and types of conflicts. So we talked about parent clients. Let's talk about student clients. So, things that are expected and acceptable with students, again, policy misunderstandings, misreadings, and didn't readings. We know that that's going to happen. And again, unclear communication, a rift in communication somewhere where you're just not on the same page. Things that might be unacceptable. Again, disrespectful behavior, blatant disrespect towards instructors or peers, mocking, ignoring instructions, those types of things. That's going to undermine the learning environment, and that's going to need to be nipped in the bud. Also, things like refusal to participate. Now, this is a tricky business because there are going to be circumstances where students don't want to do certain things because it makes them uncomfortable. That's not what we're talking about here. But refusal to participate in lessons as like a form of protest or disagreement. It's normal for students to have off days, but persistent refusal is probably a sign of a deeper issue that does need to be addressed. And then the final thing that's, iffy is, violating studio policies on purpose. If it comes to things like misusing equipment, skipping lessons intentionally without telling an instructor, that shows disregard for the studio, and that will also have to be dealt with. So those are some of the standard conflicts that we can expect in our studio business. I know that you've all been there, right? Having clients that have misunderstood policies or didn't read policies, who are asking for exceptions or, just straight up saying, no, I don't want to do this. So let's start talking about how do we figure this out, right? So when it comes to dealing with conflict, one of the first steps is to start recognizing the difference between conflict and a communication rift. So I like to do something that I call the conflict test. So how do we figure out if this issue that has arisen? We're going to go with that one. How can we figure out, is this an actual conflict that really needs attention, like in a very specific way, or is this something that can be just communicated differently? So my first step when it comes to the conflict test is to sit with the question for a minute, maybe an hour, maybe a day. The idea being that when we can kind of hit the pause button for a moment, this gives us more space to respond instead of react, because it is easy to get into reaction mode and think that, or it's easy to find ourselves in I have to fix it right now mode. So don't be afraid to kind of hit the snooze button on something and give yourself a little space first and foremost. Now, after you've done that, hopefully it will become clear if this is just a communication rift or if this is an actual conflict that needs to be dealt with in a specific manner. So if it is a communication rift, that at that point, that's your opportunity to work with the parent or the student to unravel the misunderstanding, to really get to the core of the issue and, maybe remind them of policies or etc. like that. It is our opportunity to reestablish open communication lines, right? It's that opportunity to reestablish expectations as well. Now, if you've sat with this issue in front of you and you've realized, okay, no, this is deeper, this is more of a conflict than it is just a communication issue, here are some strategies. Actually, I have another point that I wanted to mention, and this comes from my very dear friend and colleague, Michelle Marquette DeVoe. One of the things that I think that can be really useful in dealing with conflicts in your business is to remind yourself that you are not your business. You are the business owner. One of the reasons we find so many questions in forums about how do I deal with this issue, and we can sense that there's a lot of frustration in these questions, is because since we are sole prop, the majority of us are sole prop owners, right? We work for ourselves. We don't have anybody else in our business. It's easy to take things personally. So when you are headed into dealing with a conflict, take a moment and remind yourself, I am not my business. My worth is not tied to the business itself. You are the business owner, and you are deserving of respect as the business owner and as a human being. Those are two separate things. And that can take a while to really sink in sometimes. And oftentimes we have to remind ourselves of this. Okay, so let's take a look at strategies for conflict resolution. If this is resonating with you, if you're enjoying the content so far, take a little hot second. Let me know by doing us a quick favor and hitting the like and heart buttons on this video. Or if you think that there is a music teacher friend or organization that could benefit from this free discussion, please take a moment and share that with them. That's one of the best ways that you can show us here at Savvy that you appreciate what is going on. Okay, so strategies for conflict resolution. Let's get to the good stuff, right? I'll reiterate. Give yourself space to respond. Taking a moment or even a day or two to breathe and compose yourself before responding to conflict can really lead to more thoughtful and less reactive solutions. And when you start deciding what is the solution, how am I going to communicate this, we get to make some decisions, right? I think one of the most important ways to communicate when there is a conflict in the studio is, this just depends on every situation, right? But one of the most important and best ways to do it is to actually have a conversation, a talking conversation, whether that is in person or over the phone or over Zoom. So engage in that face-to-face conversation where you can practice active listening, where you can ensure that both parties, yourself and the client, feel heard and understood. That is going to be really important. And like this, it comes back to what Laura shared earlier. Sticking to the facts is also very important because it can be easy to fall into this assumption game. We know what assumption does. And I think back to, there's a really fantastic book, and I would definitely recommend this to anyone who's a business owner or just human being. The book is called Difficult Conversations. It's really excellent. So if you find yourself struggling with conflicts in your studio or having conversations with people around expectations and business procedures, check out that book. It's really good. Okay, so when we are engaging in conflict resolution, one, we are deciding to actually have a conversation with that person. Two, afterwards, we want to really work on reestablishing communication channels and expectations because most conflicts arise out of there being some kind of misalignment here. So we can use those direct conversations to clarify misunderstandings and to realign expectations. This is often more effective than written communication for very nuanced issues. That said, it is also important to follow up those conversations with written communication. So when you do have that conversation to resolve the conflict, follow it up with documentation. So keeping a written record of how conflicts are resolved can provide clarity and also reference for future interactions. And that's going to ensure that both you and the client, have acknowledged and agreed to the solution. This is something that sometimes we kind of skip over. And I think it's important to remember this aspect because, one, what I just said, like, this is like a record of how the conflict was resolved, and this is like ensuring that both parties acknowledged we have had this conversation. So you can literally send an email that says, hey, following up from our conversation today, here are the things that we've agreed to. I wanted to make sure that I sent this to you in writing so that there were no misunderstandings in the future. I look forward to working with you, etc. That, and you can then use those documented way, the documentation that you've worked on, that follow-up, that can be used and examined as like part of an SOP in the future. So those emails can be really important because you might be able to use them again. All right. Oh, thank you. Linda just gave a little heart here. That's very nice of you. Thanks so much. All right, let's get to our final section of today. And that is this. We can talk about resolving conflicts, and every conflict is going to be unique. And we know that it's impossible to avoid all conflicts, but how can we put some preventative measures in place in order to maybe avoid some of these? Well, there's a few, okay? First and foremost, it's important to know who your ideal clients are. And let's be clear. Ideal client does not mean somebody who is never going to disagree with you. It does not mean somebody who is never going to forget to read a policy. That's not what an ideal client is. And it's really easy to, see a conflict and look at, this thing happened, this communication issue, etc., and immediately label the person as, well, they just must not be an ideal client. I cannot get on board with that. It's our job as business owners to work on communication in our business. So just because there's been a conflict with a client doesn't mean that they're not ideal. Plain and simple. That said, it is important to know the type of people that you want to work with in your business, because if you can attract more of those types of people, you are less likely to have conflicts in your studio. So understanding your ideal client and really getting very clear on who those people are and how to market to them is your first step in avoiding conflicts. The second thing is when it comes to onboarding clients, I know, and I am guilty of this, that it is simpler to just send a policy via email, to have a policy on a form that somebody clicks, and just not talk about it. Let's stop doing that. Let's set the stage from day one. Don't be afraid to go over those policies and expectation in person during the inquiry process, during the first lesson, heck, even during the first month of lessons. Because when we actually go over them verbally with people, this is really going to help us set those clear expectations, the contracts, etc., and it's going to foster a positive studio culture. When a client, when you can go through those things with a client in person, they are more likely to retain that information. And I know that a lot of teachers are nervous to do that because they feel as though that is not teaching. Your job is not just teaching. You're more than a teacher. You're a business owner. And if we want to avoid conflicts, one of the best ways to do that is to put that business hat on from day one. Another preventative measure that we can lean into is repetition. Repeating expectations is good for everyone. So it can mean regularly reviewing and reinforcing studio policies and expectations through, sending out reminders in email, etc. Let's say, for instance, let me give you a specific example of this. When bad weather starts to arise, right? Let's say it's November, December in Western PA, and the weather has started to get iffy. That is a perfect opportunity to take a section from your policy that reviews, here is how we deal with inclement weather. For me, it's doing online lessons, and, it would be important to send out an email that has hey, it's starting to snow. Just wanted to send out a reminder for how we deal with inclement weather. Here are the steps that you can take. And also going through that in person in lessons. There are so many opportunities throughout the year to remind. And remember, to remind is kind. It's not annoying. I love reminders about things because my brain is not going to hold all that information. And the final bit of advice and encouragement here is to remember when we are trying to avoid conflict, right? When we are trying to avoid that escalation, when something is at that level of this is a communication rift right now, but it could easily escalate into a conflict, don't assume. Avoid jumping to conclusions or, thinking that there's malicious intent behind something. Remember, you may not be fully aware of the story of this person who's in front of you. And when we can adopt that mindset, this is going to encourage more empathy and patience when it comes to resolving those misunderstandings. All right, so we're going to wrap things up. If there is anything that you all would like to add to the conversation, now is the time to do that. And I will take a moment to, let me remind you all, if you want to get the notes from today, if you drop the word conflict down below, whether you're on Instagram or if you're on Facebook, that will help you get a hold of the show notes. And then also, I wanted to, can't find, how do I get rid of that? There we go. If there's anyone here who is thinking, you know what, I need some help with conflict management, or I need help with other business strategies, reach out. I am going to be opening 2 spots for one-on-one clients beginning in April. This is a perfect time of year if you are thinking about shifting business strategies, shifting models, if you are looking to, really refine your pricing, anything like that. I'm going to be opening up 2 spots starting in April, and it's the perfect opportunity to get out ahead of that before the summer comes so that you are ready to roll out new policies, new procedures next fall. So reach out if you want to get information about that. And let's do a little recap today. All right. Recap time. This is my favorite. Let's go real fast. All right, if you enjoyed this, let me know. And here we go. Running a studio is no small feat, particularly when it comes to managing conflicts with clients. So whether it's a mix-up with a parent or a student, I know that these things can really kind of throw us. Let's talk about some of the strategies that we can put in place in order to manage conflicts and keep them from escalating in our studio businesses. The first step when it comes to managing conflicts in your studio is to sit down and identify what are some of the sources of typical conflicts in your studio. Make a list of the things that have happened in the past, and this can be really useful to start thinking ahead and what are some of the ways that we can prevent these things from happening in the future. So sit down, think about where are the conflicts arising, make a list, and then you're going to have something to deal with. The second thing that we want to remember when it comes to conflicts, all right, not every conflict is actually a conflict. Let me define what I mean by this. When something arises in your studio and there's a misunderstanding and you're not quite sure how to deal with it, the first thing that I want you to do is issue a conflict test and ask yourself to sit with this for a moment, an hour, a day, and really do some deep digging and ask yourself, is this an actual conflict or is it just a communication rift? Because oftentimes it's a communication rift instead of a real conflict. A real conflict involves malicious intent, and the majority of these things that happen in our businesses don't have malicious intent behind it. So sit down, give yourself some space, and figure out, is this an actual conflict or just something that needs to be talked through? Now, when it comes to dealing with conflict in your business, here are very specific strategies that you can use. First, you're going to give yourself space to respond. There's no need to rush to pick up the phone or to send that email or to send that text. Give yourself a little bit of space and compose yourself before you respond to that conflict. That is going to lead to much more thoughtful and less reactive solutions. The next thing is to actually have conversations. Talk it through, whether that's in person, on the phone, or on a Zoom call. Having that face-to-face conversation where active listening can be practiced can ensure that both parties feel heard and understood, and you're going to get to a resolution much quicker. Once you've reached that resolution, it can be very important to make sure that you document it. So you're having that in-person, face-to-face conversation and then following up with documentation via email, a written record of how the conflict was solved. That's going to provide clarity and reference for future interactions with that client, and it ensures that both parties have agreed to that solution. Now, how do we prevent conflicts from happening? Well, there are two things that I think that can be really useful. The first thing is this: set the stage. Go over expectations in person during the inquiry process and the first lesson, not just handing a policies to someone and expecting them to read it, because we know that they're not going to. So take the time to go through those policies with people. That is going to give you the opportunity to set clear expectations and to get that contract in place. And it's also going to foster a much more positive studio culture from day one. The next thing that you can do is to remember to remind is kind. Repeating expectations throughout the year is good for everyone. So regularly revisiting and reminding people about studio policies can really help you prevent future misunderstandings and ensure that everybody is on the same page. All right, we're going to wrap it up there. And my final bit of advice here is to remember, give yourself grace. You are an amazing teacher. And you're an amazing business owner, and you can handle conflict like a pro when we give ourselves that type of grace. If you would like to learn more about this, go ahead and drop the word conflict down below, and the Savvy Sara bot will reach out to you. And we're going to wrap it up there. We will see you next time. In the meantime, stay savvy and stay you, because you are an amazing teacher, and there is no one in the world quite like you. And I think you're pretty dang awesome. Thanks for being here, everyone. We'll see you next time.